Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, founded December 4th, 1906, Cornell University, Ithaca, New York. We represent the mighty new chapter of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, founded April 12, 1912, at the University of Minnesota. We have come here today to remember a great man, not only a great man, but an alpha man. A man who has not only done great things for his time, but for my time and the times to come. That man is Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. All I ask for y'all to sit back, relax, enjoy the show.
Yes, sir. Yo, bros, you know what we came here to do?
What's that? What we come here to do? We came to step to go. Ice, go, go. Because we're too smooth.
Dr. Martin Luther King had a dream. Every day we wake up, we not only strive to keep his dream alive, but we work towards making his dreams become realities. I am Martin Luther King.
I am Martin Luther King. I am Martin Luther King.
I am Martin Luther King.
I am Martin Luther King. We are the brothers of the... Hey! Stop! Ice cold. Take it to the old school. Ice, ice, baby. Ice, ice, baby. Just like the new school. Hey, bro! Not yet. Turn! Not yet! We do it! Ice! Ice! Woo! Woo! Too cold! 1906!
Good afternoon and welcome to our 19th annual Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Convocation. I am Tiffany Ram, the chaplain of our Pan-African Student Union, today filling in for my mentor, Gianna Theory, who is unable to make it today due to bronchitis. So bear with us for, I'm not really prepared. But in honor of Martin Luther King Jr., we all do what we have to do, according to our Dr. Mary Frances Berry. Today is a special day as we have many wonderful guests. We want to begin by thanking the steppers of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. Since its founding in December 4, 1906, Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated has supplied a voice and vision to the struggle of African Americans and people of color around the world. Alpha Phi Alpha, the first intercollegiate Greek letter fraternity established for African Americans, was founded at Cornell University in Ithaca, New York, by 7 college men who recognized the need for a strong bond of brotherhood among African descendants in this country. Soon after its founding, Alpha Phi Alpha chapters were developed at other colleges and universities, not only throughout our nation, but throughout the world. While continuing to stress academic excellence among its members, Alpha also recognizes the need to help correct the educational, economic, political, and social injustices faced by African Americans today.
Good afternoon. Now, out of respect to Trina and Muhammad, they gave me a script that I'm supposed to follow. But they also said to put me on that script as well, so for me to be me, it's hard for me to follow a script, but out of respect, I'll follow some of it. So, how many came out here this afternoon to be moved? Stand up if you've been out here to be moved. Please stand up if you want to be moved today in this program. Now, please sit right back down. Now, being a person who's trying to be a visionary, you've just been moved. Now I call you to do something else to be moved higher than that. It's easy to move, but mentally, let's get moved. We are here today to honor our leaders, especially Dr. Martin Luther King, who has helped our community touch the hearts of many. In 1988, Emanita Gay Hawthorne, along with Campus Ministry, held the first convocation, and we are grateful for the contribution and legacy which still remains with us today. Her vision was to ensure that our campus and our community do not just simply recite the I Have a Dream speech, and also about taking a day off. She wanted us to become more involved in moving to the point to realize that our ability to give back to the community is possible. With so many of us here today, we are helping to fulfill both the dreams of Dr. Martin Luther King and Emanita Gay Hawthorne. And I'm not used to calling her that because we always call her Ma. So I want you to sit back and enjoy yourself, but also I'm going to call you to do more than be moved. We're going to first now have Tiffany, who's the chaplain of the Pan-African Student Union, to come up and lead us in prayer.
I'd ask you first all that you would stand. And I love to pray by holding my hands and closing my eyes, but you all can do whatever you need to keep you focused on our prayer today. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for this opportunity for us to come together today to celebrate the achievements of our ancestors. We ask you to help us realize that we are living a legacy and our ability is to be helpers to one another. Let us go forth from this convocation with renewed spirits and our efforts to continue the fight for social, civil, and political injustice. Amen. We will now, for those of you who attended our lunch just a few moments ago actually, be welcoming our very own Linda Gibb and Boyd Kaler as they perform Lift Every Voice and Sing. Linda is a junior special education student and Boyd is a reference librarian here at Augsburg.
Those of you who have a hymnal book, it's on page 841. I believe Linda Gibbs will sing the first stanza, and we can join in on the second and third.
Till
Thank you. Thank you both for that wonderful performance. Now, I would like to welcome Augsburg's president, new leader, Paul C. Pribbenow. Was elected as the 11th president of Augsburg College in 2006. He has a distinguished career in academia. President Pribbenow is a strong proponent for the tradition of Lutheran higher education and his concepts and vocation and service. This is also the doctor's first convocation with us, and so much, and we look forward to you adding your staple because you've inherited a great tradition. So I would like the community to welcome Dr.
Good afternoon. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to this 19th annual Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Convocation. What a great occasion. And I want to thank all of our special guests, the steppers. How fabulous was that? I mean, the earth is still, if I wanted to be moved, the earth is still shaking down here. For Boyd and Linda, it's just such a pleasure to have such wonderful talent right here in our own community. We're going to hear later from the Shiloh Missionary Baptist Church Choir, which I see their numbers. They look like they're going to sort of really lead us in great song. We also have some special guests with us, and this is so special. We have the children, the students, and the faculty from the Southside Family School, a charter school where its primary curriculum is focused on civil rights. So what a wonderful chance to have them here today and to be a part of this celebration here at Augsburg College. I am so proud to be a part of a college community where for 19 straight years we have taken the time out of our busy lives to come together as a community, as a campus community, as a neighborhood, as a city, to honor the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I had the opportunity in my own graduate school career at the University of Chicago to study Dr. King's work very deeply, his work, whether it's his written work and his letters from jail or his essays and sermons and the various ways that he helped to inform my own discipline, which is social ethics. He was a scholar and someone who thought deeply about very important issues. But at the same time, of course, he was a prophet. And that in many ways today, what strikes me most about this gathering is that though we have all those words, and those words are important for us to keep track of and to study and to reflect upon, as we have done here on campus with the World House essay this year, even most important, and I think this day comes to symbolize it, what we want to do is we want to remember this man, and this man who was a prophet in our midst. We kill our prophets. That is a long tradition in the human nature. Those who come to us with words that shake us up, that challenge the status quo, are people that are shuttled off to the margins. And Dr. King died for his prophecy, for the message that he brought to us. And our responsibility of those who carry that legacy forward must be to take his words of prophecy and to make them real day in and day out. We have to make them. We can't just have one day a year where we come together to celebrate. This must be a day where we are challenged, where we are provoked, where we have the call to be those who follow in his path. And I take that quite seriously. This is a college with a deep, intentional commitment to diversity. What do we learn from Dr. King about our commitment to diversity, to fighting racism, to fighting poverty, to fighting war in the world that tears apart the community, the World House, as he called it in his famous essay, his Nobel Peace Prize acceptance speech. And I am deeply committed to how this college can become a beacon, can become a community where we live out his aspiration for what he called the beloved community, those people who come together and work together to further fairness and justice and equality in all of our lives. It seems to me we could ask not for a better guide than we have today in our special guest, Dr. Mary Frances Berry. Many of you know her work over the years. She's written many books, and you'll learn much more about her background in a few minutes. But as I thought again about Dr. Berry and her presence here, I was struck by a couple things. In one hand, she is a wonderful example of what we hold up for our students as someone who has both lived a very distinguished life in the academy and in professional life and has a great record to back that up. But she's also someone at the same time who has lived deeply her activism and her commitments out in her service on the Civil Rights Commission, in her constant presence in the struggle for civil rights over the past 40 years. And what a great role model for us to bring here to challenge all of us again to think about what it means to live in this legacy. the same time, I was struck, I had a chance to read one of Dr. Berry's essays here last week, and she talked a little bit about Dr. King and about his legacy. One of the things that she lifted up out of his legacy that she recalls, and I think is so much lived out in her own life, is the fact that this is a struggle that will never end. That we have an aspiration, and certainly the Dream speech offers us an aspiration for the kind of world that we would like to live into. But as she reminded us at lunch, Dr. King did not come to comfort the afflicted, or not to afflict the comfort. He came to bring us a strong message and to challenge us to think about how we need to shake things up. And in her life, over 40 years of her professional life and experience in the world, what Dr. Berry has done for us has been a role model also in how we live out this struggle day in and day out. And so for this college community, trying to understand how we become the beloved community, how we live out that aspiration, I'm so pleased that we have a wonderful guide with us today in Dr. Berry. So thank you. It's great to have you all here. Let's enjoy this wonderful celebration. Thank you.
Thank you, President Pribbenow. Let us now welcome Augsburg Student Body President Maria Mitchell. Maria is a senior with a double major in both sociology and secondary education. Maria.
Good morning, everyone. My fellow brothers and sisters, students, staff, faculty, alumni, and community members. I would like to welcome you all here on behalf of Augsburg College student government and the entire student body. Every year we look forward to the celebration of Martin Luther King Jr., and we are all excited that you could be here to experience it with us. Being student body president, I hear a lot of what students are talking about. Many of the issues that Martin Luther King Jr. talked about many years ago, I hear about every single day from the students in this community. In orientation, classes, service learning, and student organizations, in activities such as presentations of spoken word and through poetry in Augsburg's Murphy Square publication, students are engaged in conversations about and sharing in their own and others' passionate experiences with diversity, poverty, classism, racism, militarism, and freedom. I challenge you to be captivated by the following celebration of Martin Luther King Jr. with an appreciation for his endless contributions to society, his incredible faith in others, and his loving, compassionate heart. But at the same time, I challenge you to leave here with a deep, intense yearning to continue the revolution he began, to internalize his compassion and love for all people and share it with others, despite, as King explained it, a sometime hostile world. Let us hear some words from the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s essay, The World House. But today, our very survival depends on our ability to stay awake, to adjust to new ideas, to remain vigilant, and to face the challenge of change. The large house in which we live demands that we transform this worldwide neighborhood into a worldwide brotherhood. Together we must learn to live as brothers, or together we will be forced to perish as fools. There is nothing to prevent us from paying adequate wages to school teachers, social workers, and other servants of the public to ensure that we have the best available personnel in these positions, which are charged with the responsibility of guiding our future generations. There is nothing but a lack of social vision to prevent us from paying an adequate wage to every American citizen, whether he be a hospital worker, laundry worker, maid, or day laborer. There is nothing except short-sightedness to prevent us from guaranteeing an annual minimum and livable income for every American family. There is nothing except a tragic death wish to prevent us from reordering our priorities so that the pursuit of peace will take precedence over the pursuit of war. There is nothing to keep us from remodeling a recalcitrant status quo with bruised hands until we have fashioned it into a brotherhood. This call for a worldwide fellowship that lifts neighborly concern beyond one's tribe, race, class, and nation is a reality, a call for an all-embracing and unconditional love for all men. This often misunderstood and misinterpreted concept has now become an absolute necessity for the survival of man, When I speak of love, I am speaking of that force which all the great religions have seen as the supreme unifying principle of life. Love is the key that unlocks the door, which leads to the ultimate reality. Let us hope that this spirit will become the order of the day. We can no longer afford to worship the god of hate or bow before the altar of retaliation. The oceans of history are made turbulent by the ever-rising tides of hate. History is cluttered with the wreckage of nations and individuals who pursued the self-defeating path of hate. We are now faced with the fact that tomorrow is today. We are confronted with the fierce urgency of now. In this unfolding conundrum of life and history, there is such a thing as being too late. Procrastination is still the thief of time. Life often leaves us standing bare, naked, and dejected with a lost opportunity. The tide of the affairs of men does not remain at the flood. It ebbs. We may cry out desperately for time to pause in her passage, but time is deaf to every plea and rushes on. Over the bleached bones and jumbled residues of numerous civilizations are written the pathetic words, "Too late." There is an invisible book of life that faithfully records our vigilance or our neglect. The moving finger writes, and having writ, moves on. We still have a choice today. Nonviolent coexistence or violent co-annihilation. This may well be mankind's last chance to choose between chaos and community. Now, I say to you, come, my brothers and sisters, let us heed this call to action. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. Can you guys check and make sure the aisles are dry? Because the choir, and as I talk about you guys, in good words, you guys can set up just to give you time. But I need to make sure that everything's dry because this choir may have you want to step out into the aisle and move and dance, and that's okay. But Augsburg wants me to give you the disclaimer that they're not responsible if you fall or hurt yourself. But we will pray for you. Dr. John Francis Williams conceived Shiloh Missionary Baptist Church on May 13, 1967. He and a group of conscientious and dedicated Christians met to formally begin the plans for the formation of an organism that was to grow, both physically and spiritually. Shiloh received the name on May 15, 1967. Shiloh took up residence at 860 Hague Avenue, St. Paul, Minnesota, formerly known as Midwest Tabernacle, on May 21st, 1967. Today, Pastor Daniels has worked to rebuild unity and Christian fellowship amongst the congregation and to help focus Shiloh under new leadership, on a true purpose, kingdom building. Under the leadership of Pastor Daniels, many plans, projects, and beginning plans include a new church located also in St. Paul. May God bless and guide them as they go forth in his name. This is Shiloh Baptist Church. Thank you.
We're Shiloh Baptist Church. This is Shiloh Temple, Minneapolis. We're Shiloh Baptist in St. Paul. Our pastor is Pastor Steve Daniels. And as you all know, Reverend Martin Luther King was a Baptist preacher now. So we're gonna give you some Baptist songs this morning. Come on, Justin. We're gonna give you some Baptist songs, and we just want you to praise the Lord with us this morning, all right?
That was wonderful. Thank you to the choir. Let's give them another round of applause. It is my pleasure and honor to introduce today's keynote speaker, Dr. Mary Frances Berry. Dr. Mary Frances Berry has been the Geraldine R. Siegel Professor of American Thought and a Professor of History at the University of Pennsylvania since 1987. In addition, she has held a distinguished career in public service. From 1980 to 2004, Berry was a member of the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. She has also served as the Assistant Secretary for Education in the U.S. Department of Health, Education, and Welfare. She is the author of 7 books and the recipient of 32 honorary doctoral degrees and numerous awards. She is also an honorary member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. So, on behalf of the New Epsilon Citywide Chapter and the Minneapolis Alumni Chapter, we would like to present you with flowers. So please help me in welcoming Dr. Mary Frances Berry.
Sister Soros. Let me just, first of all, say that the shallow choir, my, oh my, oh my, ain't he good? He's so good, right? Woke me up this morning, started me on my way. Let me get the clothes out of the closet and go out, as my deacon says, clothed and in my right mind. Early this morning. I was in my right mind then. I don't know if I'm still in my right mind, because you see, Shallow, I'm a primitive Baptist. You understand? See? So I'm a Baptist, but I'm kind of primitive, see? But I am clothed, and I think I'm in my right mind. And let me thank the Soros from Delta Sigma Theta. You don't know, but I teased them at lunch about not giving me any flowers. Because as an honorary Delta, wherever I go, if I know I'm coming, they're supposed to give me flowers. And they didn't give me any at lunchtime. So they went out and stole some from somebody. They went to a hospital and somebody's bedside and took their flowers. You ought to be ashamed of yourself. But let me just say that I am so pleased that I was invited here today, and I'm greatly moved by the proceedings so far. And I want to thank the President Pribbenow, who I've been teasing, calling him the decider. He's the decider because he's the president of this college. And it's a wonderful place to be today because of the kind of place it is and its commitment to service and to diversity and to all the things that Martin Luther King stood for. And we will continue to look for great things from this place and from this president. I'll be watching you. I'll be watching you in everything you do. This is the commemoration of Martin's anniversary again, his birthday. And it's a time when human rights challenges abroad are added to all the ones we have here in this country, which I'll talk about. We have the challenges, the continuing crisis in the Gulf Coast and Katrina and Rita, where I just spent my semester break down again, which some people have forgotten about, having Katrina fatigue, somebody told me. They're tired of that. They want to think about Donald Trump and Rosie O'Donnell. Natural disasters added to man-made ones, the challenge of AIDS and poverty and human rights challenges everywhere, and the ineptness in our leadership in our nation, which makes it even more problematic to deal with it. But when we think about Martin Luther King at this time, we have to remember that he was a human rights leader. And today, as we look at his pictures there he is, frozen in time, forever young. We will never know him as an old man, full of the wisdom of his years and probably with gray hair or maybe even bald. We will miss his marvelous pronouncements. We miss them this year as we always did. And then last year, we also lost Rosa Parks and Coretta. And the beat goes on, and the great ones pass on. Coretta, who held up the banner of Martin's vision all these years, is now gone too. We miss his marvelous pronouncements, his wit, his courage, and out of the whole fabric of his life, we're left to figure out how to create a unified community of justice. And of course, we have a great deal of work to do on his agenda of making a more inclusive society, of building bridges. What we're trying to do is to have our people align reality with the goals of the great documents and promises of our national life, the Declaration of Independence and the preamble to the Constitution. And as we look at Martin's vision today, no matter how we think about it, the civil rights movement was a great success. We see evidence of it in this room and all around us. We've come a long way as a country in his agenda. He talked about it in the Nobel Prize speech that has been mentioned over and over, and that you have chosen to teach all this year through the auspices of Trina and Alice Cloker and others here in this institution. His commitment to doing something about poverty and about racism and about militarism and war in the world. We see some progress on part of his agenda. We've moved a long way toward fairness and justice and equal opportunity for people of color, Asian Americans, Latinos, African Americans, and for gays and lesbians and sexual minorities in general, and for the disabled, and for poor people of whatever race or color in our political and national life. Many people are committed to that change and to more change. We see symbols of it all around us. Nancy Pelosi as the first woman speaker of the House. We see Keith Ellison getting elected in Minnesota. And we even see all those people that Bush has in his inept administration, Condi Rice and all them people. His inept crew, I call them, there. So we see a lot of change that has been taking place. Even some progress for Native American Indians. Not much, and we have to remember that not all tribes have casinos. They don't all have casinos, and they don't all own the Hard Rock Cafe or something. But there is progress. And when we think about the progress that has been made, we have to think about that we have to continue to work on. For Martin Luther King, on a day like this, we usually think about him as the great hero who everybody appreciated and everybody loved and everything was fine and dandy to the end of his life. And that's not true. Martin was at the height of his fame and respect when he got the Nobel Peace Prize. He was on the cover of Time magazine. He had every kind of accolade that anyone could want. The great Civil Rights Act of 1964 was passed that year, with the 65 Act to come the year after that. And then something happened. By 1966, there was a conference on civil rights at the White House, and Lyndon Johnson made it known that Martin was not invited. And yet here he was, the great civil rights leader, yet he could not come. He was persona non grata. You had, if you go back and read the media in 1966 and 67, there are people writing articles calling him names. Martin Luther Coon, what more does he want? What does a Negro want? There were some articles spewing about, you can sit down at lunch counters, so shut up. You know, all of this happened. Martin came out against the war in Vietnam, and he was criticized severely for that. He began to emphasize more and more the class issues in our society and the poverty that still existed unattended. And of course, he was involved with organizing the Poor People's March when he was assassinated, and with the garbage truck folks in Memphis. And the Poor People's March then died in the mud in Resurrection City on the mall, where it rained and rained and rained, and we thought it would never, ever stop raining. And the Poor People's March died, and Martin was gone. And people tried to take up the banner, and they were not as successful as he was in challenging people. The other thing we forget about Martin, we see him as the great leader, and students often say to me, you know, we would do something about X if we had a leader. Why don't we have a leader, like, you know, Martin Luther King or something? Martin Luther King was not born a leader. He wasn't born with something on his belly button that said leader. Didn't happen like that. He was sitting there and was picked to be a leader from among all the people who were there. And then he went on and he did what he did, and on many occasions he said he didn't know why he kept doing all these things. Leading in this way. He could not explain it except that he had a vision and he was moved to do it, and he did it because he could not do otherwise. So people can be leaders who weren't born to be a leader. His words, his vision, his desire to see people be better than we are challenged and disturbed those who opted for the status quo. Even his I Have a Dream speech, in a way, using the phrase, I have a dream all by itself, reinforces status quo, because you can dream all day and do nothing. Just, I'm dreaming. What are you doing? I'm dreaming. You have to get up, as my mama says, off your do-nothing stool and do something. Not just sit around dreaming. But his words, he wanted to challenge and disturb people. What do you call it? Afflicting the comfortable and comforting the afflicted. And they're prophetic in season and out. Nancy Pelosi just recently used his words to stir the Democrats not to be afraid to stand up for security and peace and justice in the Democratic caucus, you know, on the Hill, when they were all sitting there arguing about which way they should go and what would be the political consequences of X and Y and Z. That was just last week that she had to do that. And so we talk about his vision of everybody, and also the I Have a Dream speech. I want to tell you, Martin never called it I Have a Dream speech. He never thought of it that way, and he never called it that. You know what he called it? He called it the blank check speech. And if any of you went to the March on Washington, or ever read about it or saw a movie about it, he said we've come to our nation's capital to cash a check that will give us freedom and justice on demand. But we are told what? The Bank of Justice is bankrupt. But we have come here this day to cash that check, to give us freedom and justice. And then he talked about the dream and so on, but nobody wants to talk about the blank check. Nobody wants to talk about that. And people who talk about the Nobel Prize speech, which is in Where Do We Go From Here, Chaos and Community, which you just read. The president of the student body read part of it. So I won't read the part that I had, the same part that you had. I had down here, but I won't read it because you read it. He believed, of course, that we should be concerned about everybody in the world, and not just particular people, nations and race and gender. It's a World House vision. And what does his message have to say to us? And what do we do if we want to achieve his vision in this post-9/11 world? Some people say in the post-9/11 world, his vision doesn't have anything to do with anything, that he was just some naive romantic who kept talking about nonviolence and peace and stuff, and that that's not the way of the world. Well, there are many different ways to look at the unfinished agenda of Martin Luther King. You can talk about, if you want to, the garden variety of discrimination that still exists in our country. I could give you a whole litany of testers who show that there's still bias if you want to buy a house and so on. Or if you want to get a job, or if you get on the phone and you say your name is Tashika or Tanika, how they tell you they don't have any jobs. And if you get on and say your name is Kimberly, they say, come on down and be interviewed. You know, I could tell you all those stories and let you know that. I could tell you about the bias in trying to get insurance for your car, or mortgages, and all the rest of it. I could talk to you about many of these things, about sticky floors where people are hired for jobs and they can't get promoted. We talk about glass ceilings Nancy Pelosi talked about she had cracked the marble ceiling of the Capitol because she could now be the speaker, and her granddaughter said because Mimi, her grandmother, had gotten that job, that meant women could get other jobs. Well, unfortunately, there's too much bias in employment in terms of how far people can go still in society. So glass ceilings and sticky floors, you can't get up off the floor. Once you get hired, you're there. I could talk about all those things. I could talk about healthcare disparities and health insurance, or the people who do not have it, and how millions of people in this country still have a situation where if a sick child cries out in the night, the parent has to wonder whether the child is $50 sick or $100 sick, or whether they can take them to the hospital or not, and they don't have a doctor. And if they go to the emergency room in many communities around this country, I don't know what happens around here, the emergency room is full of people lined up, laying on the floor, waiting. You'd think you were in a third world country because they have no health insurance. I could tell you about that as part of the unfinished business. I could tell you about the AIDS problem increasing in the black community, especially among black women, and how people don't have the money to buy, or the insurance, the medicines that will stave off death and make them whole and able to live, and so they can be like Magic Johnson, who can afford it. I can tell you about the homophobia in the black community and elsewhere, which in fact interferes with and make us judgmental about each other, sometimes in the name of religion, because our vision of religion is not like that of Martin Luther King, which was an all-encompassing, humane vision of loving everybody and being inclusive, as opposed to a vision of being judgmental about people and saying who should be cast out and casting stones at people when we have, motes in our own eyes that we could worry about trying to fix. I could tell you about the article that was in the paper the other day about how the churches, black churches, are talking about how they don't have enough masters of music, and they don't have enough directors, and they don't have enough men who are involved. And I could tell you that if in the black church, two kinds of people decided not to come to church on Sunday, the church would close. If all the women decided not to come, and if the gay men decided not to come, the church would either close or they wouldn't have any music at all, and there'd be very few people in there. Most of the people there are women, and there are a few gay men. I could tell you about the pastor I know of a church who had somebody who was his master of music for 30 years. And then with this new emphasis on trying to be against people because of their sexual orientation, called him in and said, "You're fired because we don't want anybody around who has your sexual orientation." The guy's been the same way for the last 30 years. He's there. Being judgmental, interfering with people's health, and not being able to say who you are and what you do, and doing it all in the name of religion. They call it the down low problem. People living on the down low. It's not just black people. I know some white men who are on the down low and been on the down low forever. So we need to do that. I could talk about that. I could talk about the drug problem and the fact that we don't have the kind of treatment that we should have. I could talk about incarceration, the people who are in jail, the military-industrial complex, and all of these as headwinds that keep us from developing human capital. These are issues that exist in our society that interfere with us achieving Martin Luther King's vision. I could go on and talk to you about globalization and outsourcing and the jobs that have left this country and how some people think that's a good thing. Martin Luther King wouldn't think it was a good thing unless you did something about jobs for the people who are still here and figured out what to do, and nobody has quite figured that out. I could tell you that the minimum wage increases that have just been approved by the House of Representatives and many states around the country and communities have approved just a drop in the bucket toward providing what Martin thought was a living wage for people. It's still not a living wage. $7 an hour is not a living wage. I don't know what you live on. Martin Luther King said in that speech that unregulated capitalism is bad because it forgets about community, the sense of community you should have, engaging communities, worrying about each other, caring about each other. But socialism as a system is bad because it forgets in talking about community, individualism, and people individually have their own ideas and what they want to do, and it's too restrictive. So he said what you need is a socially conscious democracy, one that sort of combines the best features of all these things, caring about others, being able to act as you wish to act on your own, and doing it all in the greater good and the greater interest. And that's what we don't have, a socially conscious democracy. And then the other headwind is education, the lack of quality education. We have had so many proposals and solutions to the public education problem in this country in the last 100 years. I had a student the other day that wrote a paper on all the different proposals and policies that had been suggested in the last 50 years about what to do about K through 12 education. The fact is that most K through 12 education in most school systems in this country works. Most people are satisfied with their schools, the schools their kids go to, but large numbers of them don't work. And the ones that don't work are the ones that we keep trying to fix. And when we come up with alternatives, we are coming up with alternatives because we think that the other ones are fractured, the public schools are fractured. That's why we do it. That's why we talk about charter schools and vouchers and gosh knows anything else, because they're fractured. But there's some things that we miss, and unless we actually fix those for everybody, we're not going to solve the problem. And they are common sense, obvious things. Martin liked to propose and suggest common sense, strategic, obvious things. Whether people did them or not, they had to be proposed, even if they didn't like it. And one of them is that the main thing a child needs is attention. Does that seem obvious to you? Everybody needs attention. Don't you like attention? Children especially love attention. They love it when somebody says, you did that good, Johnny, or you didn't, Susie or Muhammad, or you did, or whatever. They don't like to be ignored. Nobody likes to be ignored. In most of our schools where the children who are the worst off kids attend, there aren't enough good teachers or other people to pay attention to what they do. I know this. My nephew decided he didn't want to go to school. He was the first one in a whole long generational of people in my family who decided he didn't like going to school. And my sister-in-law trying to figure out, why doesn't he want to go to school? He would fight you every morning. I'm not going to school. So she went to school to see what was going on. The teacher had so many people in the class that she never even had time to give him any attention. So it didn't matter what he did. Nobody ever said anything about what he did, whether he did it good or whether he did it bad. And she was struggling with the ones who were really struggling. And so he said, well, I might as well be at home. Why do I need to come here? Nobody ever pays any attention to me. So the first thing you need is good teachers in the schools and enough of them. And the other thing you need to do is respect teachers and pay them. Whenever I travel anywhere in what we used to call the third world, I'm struck by how respected I am when they look on my passport and see that I'm a professor, a teacher. I was one time in a little old town somewhere way out in Cambodia, and there was one airstrip and a plane that came every now and then, and you needed to get out, and I had this reservation, and I went, and of course there were more people trying to get on the plane than there were seats on the plane, and then the plane didn't come, and we waited a day, and finally one came. And the guy who was working there, the first thing he said to all the people who crowded up, "Make way for the teacher." That was me. So they all had to stand out of the way until the teacher got on the plane. You know, anywhere you go, they look at your badge. You in these places, you are a teacher. We give you respect. You're a teacher. Here, if I go to a party or something and everybody's hanging out and people are having a good time and it's a fancy party and people ask me what I do, I say I'm a teacher. They walk away and talk to somebody who's in business or something or whatever else. They figure she doesn't have any money. I mean, gosh. You know. I might as well say I'm on welfare. The least prestigious thing you can do is to be a teacher. And so what do is we pick on teachers. We don't pay them enough. We expect, and then we say, well, they should just do it because, you know, out of the goodness of their hearts, because they love children. I mean, where other people work and make a lot of money, they don't do it out of the goodness of their heart because they like Microsoft or whatever it is. So we need to pay teachers, and we need to pay teachers to teach in the schools where the kids need the help most. We need to have more of them there. And we also should be sensible about tests. I give tests all the time to my students. Tests are important. But you don't need to test people to find out that they don't know what you didn't teach them. So I think that if we would keep those things in mind, we might be able to improve education and human capital and do all these things that we keep saying that we want to do. There are other headwinds against trying to institute Martin's dream. On the race side, we have a backlash against diversity and against the idea of trying to increase the number of African Americans, especially in elite institutions of higher education, and Latinos also in the states where they are in large numbers. And it's amazing to me how people in a state where the taxpayers are increasingly Latinos and African Americans can believe that they will continue to pay for these elite higher education institutions that are public if their children can't go to them. It's like in the old days before the Civil War, where free Negroes, as they called us then, would work and pay taxes, but their children couldn't go to the schools. But you had to pay taxes to support the schools, but then you had to send your children to a private school. And it's becoming like that. I was out in California, where the numbers of black students and Latinos have gone down to practically nothing at Berkeley and UCLA and so on. So increasingly, the taxpayers are going to be people from these communities of color, whereas the children who are going on the campus aren't their children, and they have to send their children to the private colleges and pay for them to go. And then the other thing you have, the governor of Massachusetts, DeVal Patrick, first black governor of Massachusetts, a wonderful guy who was with us in the Carter administration. The other day, he said something very, very important. He was opposed to the people of Massachusetts voting in a referendum on taking away the rights of gays and lesbians to not be discriminated against in terms of marriage. Now, whatever you think about that issue, that's not the point. What DeVal said, though, was that in our country, under our Constitution, minorities are supposed to have rights, whether or not the public in a majority approves. Minority rights are not supposed to be up for grabs, depending on whether the majority feels like they should have rights. If you had asked the people of my home state of Tennessee during the civil rights movement that they believe black people ought to stop being discriminated against and the white people voted, they would have said no. But the idea of you having a right and a constitutional right, the courts are supposed to protect that. It's not supposed to be up for grabs. So California, you have a referendum to overturn the use of affirmative action to increase blacks and Latinos. Michigan, you just had one, and women, by the way, who are majority. You have these referendums passed to try to take away people's rights that they're supposed to have without regard. And then we have a court, a Supreme Court, with Roberts and Alito and perhaps other people. And if you go back and read, as I have done, all the notes that Roberts and Alito wrote when they worked at the Justice Department and worked in the Reagan administration, you will see how scary they really are. And then you have the esteemed Mr. Clarence Thomas sitting there agreeing with them, showing you, as with Condi Rice's, that black faces in high places doesn't always mean that you're going to get the right thing done. I have to explain that to my dear women friends who think that every time a woman gets appointed to something, we should all be happy. I said, I want to wait till I see what they do. You know, I would rather have a man in the job if he's going to do right, if she's going to get up there and do wrong, and then I have to be arguing with her because she did wrong. I don't want to do that. And then let me get to the biggest headwind, I think, is this war and this attack on human rights that we have, which goes against the grain of everything that Martin Luther King stood for and everything that I think we should be standing for. And we get told so many lies. We are in this period, I call it scoundrel time, of great deception, where the lie repeated over and over again, and then we're supposed to believe it. And then we're supposed to forget everything because we have short memories. Abu Ghraib and the torture. We've already forgotten those images that we saw on television. All those people stowed away at Guantanamo Bay who haven't done anything and haven't had any trials and who Dick Cheney says can stay there forever as far as he's concerned. Now you have a lawyer for the administration saying that any law firm that defends those people, that the corporations that hire those firms ought to stop hiring them, and then listing the names of the firms in a threat. So that not understanding that in our constitutional system, we depend on lawyers to defend people even if they're guilty. You're supposed to have a lawyer. I mean, that's the way the system is supposed to work. And lawyers who volunteer to defend you ought to be praised rather than criticized for doing so. We have also racial profiling, and we thought racial profiling was over before 9/11, but since 9/11, it's back big time. And Arabs and Muslims are finding out what it means. And this is all while the demography is changing. The population is increasingly diverse, and the fastest growing religion in this country, by the way, is the Muslim religion, in case you didn't know it. And so we have racial profiling, so we have human rights violations, so we have allegations that it's, assertions that it's okay to open our mail and read it without a court order or anything else when people feel like it, or look in our bank accounts, or do whatever. And we forget, as Benjamin Franklin, who founded the University of Pennsylvania, where I teach, said in the 18th century, that those who give up their liberty for the sake of a temporary security deserve neither liberty nor security, and they won't have either one. Now at Penn, every time you say something and you want people to believe it, you say Benjamin Franklin said it, whether he said it or not. But every speech at Penn starts, as Benjamin Franklin said, you know. But he really did say that. And Martin Luther King echoed those sentiments. So all this stuff, we're told, is supposed to be done in terms of our national security. We get lied to if it is indeed terrorism that has made us do all these things, then the terrorists have won, because they have forced us to change our way of life and give up all of our values and everything else because we're scared to death, which is what they were trying to do, apparently, which is what they said. The other thing is on the war itself. After a litany of lies, which now everybody except the 20% who still think that we're doing the right thing in Iraq believes, knows that there are no weapons of mass destruction. I hope y'all knew that. If you didn't, I have hot news off the wires. There were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. None were ever found, okay? My cousin George called me up from Nashville, as a grown man, and said, the day Colin Powell gave his speech, don't you think we have to go to war immediately and use everything we have that comes to hand because the WMD is coming to Nashville? I said, man, don't believe all that stuff. Let's just wait and see. That's just a story. And he was scared to death. Even he now knows that there's no WMD. He figured it out last week. We know that. And that was the reason, I hope you remember, why we went to war in Iraq. I hope you remember that, because it's hard to remember with what you hear in the press. Why is it important that we remember what we're told, and that when we're lied to, we call people on it? Last night, I heard Joe Lieberman on television say that if we don't stay in Iraq and win, whatever win is, that means that those terrorists over there who were the ones who did the World Trade Center on 9/11 will get off scot-free. And nobody even challenged him. In case you didn't know it, hot news off the wire. The Iraqis did not blow up the World Trade Center. In case you didn't know that, those people were from Saudi Arabia, in case you didn't know that. Now you have the American people voting in an election, something we call elections in this country. We're supposed to be a democracy. And our administration is supposed to believe in democracy. They told us that they believe in it. It's one of their primary priority items. Ms. Rice and Mr. Bush said they wanted democracy after Arafat died and the Palestinians, that they should have an election, and that our government would respect the outcome of that election and whoever was elected. Because Arafat was gone, they didn't have to deal with him anymore, and this was all going to be solved. They had an election, and guess who got elected? Hamas. What did our administration do? Well, that wasn't the kind of election we were talking about. We meant for the other guys to win. So now they say we can't recognize that. We just had an election here in this country in November, and the American people spoke loud and clear. They don't like the war. They don't like us being bogged down there. They want to change. What do we get? What do we get is an acceleration of the war, an escalation. And what do we get? And it's important when you're lied to know that you're being lied to. You know, I don't mind if people tell me the truth and then I disagree, but just to lie to me like I'm stupid, you know, or to say stuff to me like, oh, this is not an escalation, it is a surge. It is an augmentation. I said, but hey, I mean, if you increase something in that escalate, no, that's not an escalate. Aren't you increasing? No, augmentation, we're just augmenting. And what do we have? As Winston Churchill once said, he believed there should be more jaw, that is talking to people, than war, as he put it. And what we have is more war instead of jaw. We have all these people we won't talk to. Before Arafat died, we had a no-talk policy. We wouldn't talk to the Palestinians. We're not going to talk to them. Now we have a no-talk policy. We're not going to talk to the Iranians and the Syrians. We got all these people we won't talk to. Just because you talk to somebody, that doesn't mean you have to agree with them. Just because you listen to somebody, that doesn't mean you have to agree with them. But you can at least listen to what they have to say, and I'd rather listen than to get a whole lot of people killed, if I can finish that. Now, you may wonder, as I do, and I'm just about finished, but you may wonder, as I do, why is the decider doing all these things? And why is the decider ignoring the election? And I am told that the decider made strong statements last night on television about how he was going to do whatever he wanted to do, and that Mr. Cheney agreed with him. We're going to do whatever we feel like doing. Send troops, whatever, Congress, hell, to heck with the Congress. Well, I think it has something to do with, if you say to a child, if you reach up there again and get that piece of cake, I'm going to switch you. And the child reaches up and gets the piece of cake and eat it, and you don't do anything. Then you say again, if you reach up there and get another piece of that cake, boy, I'm going to get after you, and it's your life. The child reaches up and get another piece of cake. And you just keep on doing that. They don't pay you any attention, do they? Before you know it, the whole cake is gone. When Mr. Bush ran in the 2000 election and stole it, in Florida, and I know this because I did an investigation on the Civil Rights Commission in Florida with hearings and subpoenaed witnesses and everything. And we had emails from Catherine Harris, who was the Secretary of State, and other people, showing how they got together and plotted to exclude all these people from the rolls. And the Justice Department, which was under Bush, wouldn't investigate it and pursue it. But they got away with it. They won the election. They got away with it. Gore backed off. He wouldn't support those black women who got up there in the Senate and asked for them to defer the count. He wouldn't do it, and he said he didn't want to be troublesome. And so therefore he didn't do anything. And the Supreme Court went along with it. And if that had been in some other country, people would have been in the streets. They would have gone down before the White House, before the Congress, and said, no, you cannot do this. Up with this, we will not put. In this country, nobody did anything. A few people whined and moaned and said, well, And so what lesson did the Bush administration learn from this? We can do whatever we want, entirely pervert democracy, and the people aren't really going to do anything. Nobody's going to do anything. Congress is not going to do anything. Nobody's going to do anything. Now you have a pattern and practice since that time of doing whatever they feel like doing. And then every time they do something, we're all surprised. And we get an editorial in the paper, or somebody blogs something, or they write something and say, isn't that terrible, what they just did? We ought to do it, and nobody ever does a thing. And now the issue is down to, is the Democratic Congress going to permit them to get away with it this time? You ask, what are the options? There are all kinds of options. I don't want to get in the weeds about what to do, but at least they could say no, and up with this, and the people could get out and say, up with this, we will not put. But if they have learned by now, which is why they're so arrogant, which means, unfortunately, in my view, we're going to be bogged down in Iraq. And the next thing you're going to get is feel-good messages from Iraq about how great everything's going. And that's supposed to change public opinion. It's already started. Oh, the Iraqis have responded positively to our new policy. So many more have come down and asked to be on the police force. And then by next week it'll be, oh, the Iraqis now love us. And they want us to do this. And in the meanwhile, people just keep on getting killed. Until they also feel that after a while, you will get tired of paying any attention to it anyway. Because you'll be so busy looking at who won what reality contest on what TV show. And following whatever they were doing, and that it'll be the 2008 election, and then we'll hand it over to the other people. What we need is more people who are like Martin Luther King, who would stand out there and not be afraid of being criticized of this. So I ask you to work on it anyway. Don't let me be right. Show me that I can be wrong, that people can mobilize and they can do something. And also, don't be despondent about what I said, because I've already told you about how much positive change has occurred. And if you get discouraged, just remember one thing, that if Rosa Parks had taken a poll before she sat down on the bus, she'd still be standing up. But Rosa Parks acted on her conviction. Martin liked to quote Theodore Parker, who was a 19th century preacher, who said, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice." And sometimes you think that that's wrong, that Parker didn't know what he was talking about and Martin didn't know what he was talking about. But it's true, as Martin used to say, that the struggle is never a straight line. You move forward and then backward, but you never go all the way back. Also, I ask in particular young people to remember this, that somebody went through the fire to make the change that occurred. Martin and others in his generation went through the fire. And in the time before that, the people who survived slavery and Jim Crow and made the changes they could, somebody went through the fire each time. And each generation must make its dent in the wall of injustice. Somebody's got to go through the fire. We want safety, we want security, but let's not abandon our values. Because also, the immoral, I don't believe that the immoral inherit the earth or the fullness thereof. I think that in time that turns out not to be wrong. And so what we're talking about is trying to change and redeem this country. And by working together, we can do it. So I ask this as I finish, that each of you every day do something in the cause of justice. And I don't care what it is, just something you do every day. You can think about what that is you can do. And I'm not asking for anything big. I've learned to be satisfied with incremental change, so long as it is change. And you may do a very small thing. If you believe in prayer, say a prayer for our country. But do whatever you can, but don't tell anybody what you did. That's the important thing. You're not doing it because you want to go tell people I did it. Oh, well, here's what I do every day. That's not the point. You're doing it for the sake of the country and for the sake of your own soul. And just do something, and do it every day, just every day. And whenever I despair, my mother says to me when I call up and say, Ma, it's so bad, blah, 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 I'm talking to her. She says, listen, God is my president. But I say, yes, Mama, but the Lord helps those who help themselves. And so our task is helping ourselves and each other and spreading the idea of peace, community, and justice. And if we do this, we will someday fulfill Martin's vision, and then we will be able to reach his goal of peace and liberty and justice for all will become a reality. Thank you.
Augsburg is greatly blessed to have such an esteemed speaker here today. So if you would just give Dr. Mary Frances Berry one more round of applause just for thanking her. Not every day that you have such a blessing in your presence, so we have to take advantage of them when we get them. With that being said, we had the wonderful gentleman of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated here to represent Dr. King. We also then have our lovely ladies of Delta Sigma Theta here to slightly represent our honorary member, Dr. Berry. It's my privilege to honor and introduce today's steppers from Delta Sigma Theta Incorporated. Delta Sigma Theta sorority was founded on January 13th, 1913, but I actually believe they received their incorporation in 1932. By 22 collegiate women at Howard University, these students wanted to use their collective strengths to promote academic excellence and to provide assistance to persons in need. The first public act performed by Delta founders involved their participation in the Women's Suffrage March in Washington, D.C. March 1913. Delta Sigma Theta was incorporated, in 1930. And we'd like to welcome our friends and steppers of Delta Sigma Theta.
MLK and all of that. Yes. Right. So I was thinking it should be a celebration, right?
It is.
Okay, but we still kind of care. Oh. Okay. So I was thinking, maybe we can help with the celebration of the history by sharing some of our history with the people.
Okay.
Is that okay? Okay. I got it. Okay. DLTA, Delta Sigma Theta's in the 94 years ago, 22 women decided to go on a mission to make the world a little better, and in 1913 founded Delta Sigma Theta. Public service and sisterhood, all for what our founders stood. It stands true and still today because Delta Sigma Theta is the only way. Woo!
Okay, celebrating history sounds great, but it's a little old.
But you don't know where you're going till you've been. That's true.
That's true. I mean, history is great, but I mean, take for instance, my grandmother. She's great, right? But she's old. Okay, how about we try something new? Try this out.
Let's give the women from Delta Sigma Theta another round of applause, please. It's now time to bring this program to a conclusion, but one of the great things about Augsburg College is that we invite God to be with us in the beginning, and we invite him to be with you guys in the end. So before Pastor Dave comes in and conclude us out, I would like to take this time to thank a group of other participants who helped put this program and made this program a success. Will the MLK Planning Committee please stand and be recognized? Thank you. The Convocation Series Committee, President and his office, the Office of Public Relations, the Office of Public Safety, Sudexo, Dr. Mary Frances Berry. Thank you. I'd like to say a special blessing and thank you to Shiloh Missionary Baptist Church, who brought Shiloh to Minneapolis. Thank you. Pastor Dave and Campus Ministry, Panicker Student Union, Student Senate, Resident Life, Event Services, and all the faculty and staff that helped make this event a success. And may God bless you all. Pastor Dave, come close us out.
Thanks, Keith. Thanks to everybody, and especially Dr. Berry. Our next convocation is very much in line with what we heard today. It will be January 30th, and Cindy Sheehan will be our speaker, 11 o'clock a.m. That's a Tuesday, the 30th, 2 weeks from tomorrow. I want to close by doing two things. One is to use some words from Martin Luther King's sermon at Ebenezer Baptist Church a couple of months prior to his assassination. And then the second part, to use some words from the eulogy given by Dr. Benjamin Mays, the president of Morehouse College, where Martin Luther King went. The words of Dr. King: "Yes, if you want to, say that I was a drum major. Say that I was a drum major for justice. Say that I was a drum major for peace. I was a drum major for righteousness. And all of the other shallow things will not matter." Now, these shallow things, I will say parenthetically, are his Nobel Peace Prize, 300 to 400 awards from various institutions, honorary doctorates, etc. Shallow things. "And I won't have any money to leave behind. I won't have the fine and luxurious things of life to leave behind. But I just want to leave a committed life behind. And that is all I want to say. If I can help somebody as I pass along, if I can cheer somebody with a song, if I can show somebody he's traveling wrong, then my living will not be in vain. If I can do my duty as a Christian ought, if I can bring salvation to a world once wrought, if I can spread the messages as the Master taught, then my living will not be in vain." And Benjamin Mays, at his funeral on April 11th of 1968, closed with these words. I close by saying to you what Martin Luther King Jr. believed. If physical death was the price he had to pay to rid America of prejudice and injustice, nothing could be more redemptive. And to paraphrase words of the immortal John Fitzgerald Kennedy, permit us to say that Martin Luther King's unfinished work on earth must truly be our own. And now may the God of hope fill us with joy and peace in believing that by the power of the Holy Spirit we may abound in hope, in justice, and in peace. Go in peace, serve the Lord.
wasn't she